Hey everybody, it's Pastor Stephen here with the one and only Dr. Glen Maiden. Before we dive into it, I just want to give a resume for you, Dr. Glen. You have been in church ministry for 4 decades. Is that correct?
Into my fourth, yep.
Into your fourth decade.
Yes, sir.
You started serving in Kentucky? Or you went to college in
No, I
Kentucky?
went to college in Kentucky, and I started a young adult ministry in the late 80s. Hardcore, rock and roll, heavy metal. Those are the good days.
Long hair, mullets.
Totally long. No, I think we were pre-mullet.
Pre-mullet era. That's excellent. So then you moved to Michigan.
Yep, Michigan.
Did you move to Michigan to plant a church? Is that your desire?
No, I didn't want to be a pastor. I thought that was stupid. And never tell God what to do, by the way. It's not helpful. So I want to be a professor, so a teacher. So we got some education experience in a Christian school. They had a church attached to it, and they gave me the young adults, and it started to grow and flourish. And it took a couple years, and God got through to me that being a pastor could be a cool thing.
So then you planted a church in inner city Michigan.
Right.
Spent how many years there?
16.
And started with how much?
Oh my gosh, we had $350 for the first month's lease, and that was it. And we just hoped we'd make it in month 2. We had a 30-day lease on our building in the inner city. The only building we could find was in the inner city of Western Michigan. They didn't tell us when we rented the facility, but it was at the end of the drug trafficking network of Western Michigan.
Wow.
Detroit, Grand Rapids, our neighborhood.
Yeah.
They don't tell you that on the lease.
So that kind of opened the door for you to start working with addicts.
Right. Everyone in the church was an addict or survivor of abuse. And you just have to. You have to talk to the people who are coming, not the people who aren't there. You have a mosquito right there. Do this.
Got it.
Good job. Sorry.
It's out beautiful North Oregon coast.
I had to do that. And so you just have to do it. You have to speak to the people in front of you. And it was all, like I said, just addictions, alcohol, drugs. Back then, THC was illegal. So that was special. Cocaine, sex addictions, before anyone was talking about it. Yeah, it was hardcore.
So is that kind of what opened the door for you to leading to the work that you do now?
Absolutely. In 2003, I started a doctoral project on the role of anxiety in the process of addiction. It's called Anxiety Reaction. And, I focused on Jesus's words of Matthew chapter 6, verse 42 and following. Don't be anxious. 6 times he mentions the words anxiety. 3 times the words God is compassionate for you. He has compassion for you. And then I began to study the word anxiety. It means in the Greek to split the mind. That's precisely what happens as the brain develops addict systems. The brain actually splits. It's no longer able to associate spirituality, compassion, and awareness. And so it's been a great study. I had no idea it'd open up a new career in this season of my life.
So in Michigan, you started working on your first doctorate?
Right. 2003. Finished in 2006. The neuroscience and spirituality of recovery.
And then you moved to the North Oregon coast, which is where we are right now.
Yeah. So
the rain, the mosquitoes.
I'm thinking about retirement, going, hey, I'd like to retire in a tourist community on the beach. How cool. Everyone's, rich and everybody's normal. And I had no idea that the meth movement started right here.
Wow.
In our senior high, we had a 90% divorce rate. Church kids, 90%. The addictions in our leadership team were no different than the addictions for the guys at the local bar.
Wow.
Incredible.
So, and you've worked with local rehab clinics in the North Oregon coast for a long time.
4 different rehabs I've worked in professionally.
And then that led to now your second doctorate that you just completed this past year,
Right.
which is on
a PhD in clinical sexology. The specific focus is sex addiction treatment.
Mhm.
I did a certification process with Patrick Carnes on sex addiction treatment, but what I wanted to do was add a layer of sexual health. No one's talking about that. What is healthy sexually in a recovery? Addiction treatment, most addiction treatment is really quite negative. Don't do this, you're bad. Once an addict, always an addict. I think it's important to focus on the healthy side of human sexuality.
Mhm.
So that was the topic of my PhD study in clinical sexology, was the healthy side of human sexuality, looking at the book of Genesis as a sexual health primer for families.
Mhm.
So I loved it. I think it's groundbreaking work. At this point, no one wants to read it. So there you go.
So you've spent a lot of time in this world, church ministry world. You've been a part of church for 4 decades, worked with addicts, and really, and you were alive in the '60s as well during the first sexual revolution.
Totally.
And now we're really going through a secondary sexual revolution. So where do you think the importance of a healthy view of biblical sexuality comes into the church, and where did the church go wrong in the previous era that really led to what we're all walking through now?
Yeah, I think one of the reasons for the decline of evangelicalism in this era is there is no healthy view of human sexuality. There's no biblical, theological view of what is sexually healthy. There's an absence of communication with children. Some of the most premier evangelical leaders have fallen sexually. They didn't fall because their view on heaven and hell or the Trinity. It was on human sexuality. When I talk to people about their experience in the church or professional academics in Christian institutions, there's zero conversation on sexual health.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's a vacuum, and I think that answers a lot of the questions that you asked. Again, complete void, an absence, a deprivation of what is healthy, what is okay. It's like talking about nutrition and not talking about healthy nutrition.
Mm-hmm.
You just don't talk about it. People don't know what to do.
Yeah.
So
what do you think is one of the core issues of the fall, of the moral failure of, there's, for every leader that falls in the Christian world, there's 10 that are doing a good job. So, that's the ones that we see.
To the best of our knowledge.
To the best. That's true. But what are your reflections on ways that we can battle that so it doesn't continue to happen in the future?
Yeah, I've been just stunned by some of the most recent disclosures. Hillsong, which is probably one of my favorite movements of the last 25 years. Bill Hybels, I followed his ministry for a couple decades. Ravi Zacharias. And I'm not throwing stones because scriptures are very clear that's not what we're to do. I'm just reflecting on leadership. So I'm really concerned. I think that if we could go back and replay those tapes again, we would have added sexual health conversations in childhood, in college curriculum. I went to Asbury College in Warmore, Kentucky. Never a conversation on sexual health, ever, in the entire tenure. I went to Grand Rapids Baptist Seminary, which is now Grand Rapids Theological Seminary. Never a conversation, ever.
So what do you think it looks like to have those healthy conversations? And I should remind, we've had multiple conversations in the past of the culture that we've created as an addictive culture. Mm-hmm. And Patrick Carnes, who is really an expert in this field, talked about the way to create a sex addict or an addict in general. What were his reflections?
Yeah, so Patrick Carnes has been doing this for about 3 decades, and in his research, he's discovered the typical sex addict in North America comes from a Bible-believing home that is focused on shame-based rules, sex negativity, and deprivation. So deprivation looks like don't take care of yourself. You just keep giving and giving and giving until there's nothing left. um, sex negativity is the conversation that sex is bad. Don't do this, don't do that, rather than talking about the sexually healthy pieces of human sexuality. Shame-based rules. This is white, that's black. Bible-believing home. It's very typical. Some of the most prolific scandals of the last 25 years have really been in Bible-believing movements.
Yeah. So it's really this concept of shame that leads down the path of addiction.
Yeah, shame in my work is always the underlying driver of addiction. So whether it's alcohol or cocaine, this week I'm working with an alcoholic. That's intense shame. His mother was mentally ill, and so it's created this tremendous sense of overwhelming shame of unworthiness. She's never quite present to take care of him. I have another guy who's a cocaine addict. I have a sex addict who grew up in the church. Just met with him. He's doing very, very well. But again, the themes are the same. Sex negativity, black and white rules, very, very rigid. And so my view is, let's operate on the other side of the street. Let's focus on spiritual homes. Homes that love Jesus, who love worship. Homes that are focused on healthy, godly boundaries rather than rigid rules. Every family, every child needs boundaries. Deprivation, instead of deprivation, we focus on nurture and care. Teaching kids how to take care of the image of God within them. And then talking about sexually healthy pieces, that are age appropriate. In the book of Genesis, there are 3 major sections, chapters 1 through 5. All the images there in the first 5 chapters are positive and appropriate for your small children. Chapters 6 through 11 deal with Noah and the flood, the ark, and specifically deal with abuse prevention. And then 12 through 50 deal with every other kind of sexual health conversation that you would want to have with your adolescent children. So the book of Genesis is very clear. There are 19 distinct sexual health terms in Genesis. So what it does is it kind of lays out for you, teach your kids how beautiful human sexuality is, 1 through 5. 6 through 11, let's teach them how not to get abused. What's inappropriate. Specifically, incest is the conversation in 6 through 11. And then 12 through 50 deals with everything from sexually transmitted diseases. Abraham and Sarah go down to Egypt, and Pharaoh takes
his wife
Sarah into his harem. Well, suddenly everyone busts out with a disease.
Yeah.
Well, sexually transmitted disease. There you go. And there's rape conversation in 12 through 50. The rape of Amnon, and the rape of Dinah, and we're getting attacked, Pastor.
Yes, the North Oregon coast.
Yeah,
That's
I love
why we
it.
live out here.
And
The beauty.
yeah, it's great. There's also birth control. There are the images of Onan and coitus interruptus in Genesis chapter 38. So it's a full spectrum of sexual health conversations.
So somebody who grew up in a sex negative home, again, we would define sex negative as what? So
Sex is
rigid
bad.
rules.
Yeah, anything sexual is bad. A sex negative home, parents, they're not hugging, they're not showing affection because it's bad.
Yeah.
They're concerned. I think the pastoral concern, I think of many has been, well, we don't want to move children into being, out of control sexually. The problem is that if we don't teach them what healthy sexuality is, it creates a deep sense of shame. And again, shame is that underlying driver of addiction.
So for somebody who grew up in a sex negative home, which is a lot of evangelicals, what is because there is just a deep sense of shame even if you have conversations. I have 4 kids, and we're attempting to raise them with healthy sexuality and teach them just simply like, these are boys, these are girls, these are boy parts, girl parts, and it makes you feel really like tense and awkward inside because it's something that I've never had a conversation with my parents about ever, and so it's really uncomfortable.
True. Yeah, my dad handed me a book and that was it.
It's good luck, son.
Yeah. Good luck is it. So
Yeah. So, where's like the path forward? Like, where's the beginning steps if someone says, "Hey, I want to with either kids, grandkids, and say I want to instill a healthy sexuality in my family. I want to break the bond of my family system of years and years of saying this is sex negative, and I really want to view it more of on a God created, God given thing." Where's step one in that conversation?
research shows that the primary influence on children for sexual health is their caregivers. So I don't think it's the church. I don't think it's a program. It's not. I don't think it's a book that you're going to buy. I think it is each parent and each grandparent taking responsibility for their kids and their grandkids, and modeling sexual health for them, having conversations. What we did with our children would be watching TV, and if something inappropriate in our view came up, we'd talk about it. We wouldn't ban them from TV completely. We'd have conversation about it. And I think that's the issue. We're down regulating kids instead of sticking with them with shame. We're helping them process what sexual health is, and that way it's age developmental rather than we're pushing kids. One of the challenges we had with our kids is that they went to public school, and so they'd come home with knowledge beyond their development, and so we had to fill in the gaps for them. And it's a great challenge in this world, especially with the gender politics happening today.
Yeah. So we're saying it's interesting. It's a relational based thing.
Yes.
It's here are the people I love in my life, and I want to have conversations. That's what we're talking about.
Exactly.
And in the past, there hasn't been conversations. I think that's the challenging piece.
It is.
There's been, again, it's the negativity of that's bad, turn it off, let's not talk about it ever again. Again, I remember in my life, my parents, you had the conversation of the birds and the bees, and I remember my dad.
I'm so sorry.
My dad took me out, and just like we went fishing, and I was a kid, and I was like, this is probably why I don't like fishing today. He took me out and he said, like...
That's right. You never liked fishing with me, did you?
No, I'm a terrible fisherman, but this is why. So he took me out and said, and I think he's doing, like my parents, the best that they could, took me out, sat me down, said, son, and I was excited to go fishing with my dad. And then he just lays out everything, just like one off. This is done. There was no conversations before, no conversations after. It was just 15 minutes of this is what happens. This is how babies are made. And that's why I don't like fishing today.
My humble apologies. So again, maybe an option, because no one taught him. That's the thing. And
yeah.
I think in his mind he was doing a good thing.
Absolutely.
There was just no guidance on any level. My mom talks about her formative education. She said that she was on the verge of getting married, and she was like 18. And she said, Mom, don't you think it's time to tell me what the heck is going on? She goes,
wow.
Nope.
Wow, good luck.
She said, your father taught me everything I needed to know.
God.
How frightening and awful to talk about your grandparents and their sex life. But so there's been no education. For them, again, in her world, being pregnant was a shameful thing.
Wow.
They wouldn't talk about it openly. They called it being in the PG, pregnant. It was shameful.
That was the era, right? They would hide if they were pregnant for a long time.
Exactly.
Like no one would say, like, oh.
Exactly. So I think that in this era, caregivers who can talk openly and in a healthy manner, it's going to go a long way. What's happening now, we are in another sexual revolution, much like the 60s. This is on a different level. There was no social media in the 60s. And so I think the stakes are higher for caregivers to get involved, right now.
Mm-hmm. And simply, I think it's the thing, it's you start somewhere and it's have conversations. So, like, in your mind, if you're watching something with your kids or grandkids and something comes up and you're like, oh, instead of just like, let's turn it off and never talk about everything, it's like, hey, let's talk about this.
Exactly. Good. That's it.
Creating the openness and the vulnerability. And I think that's another piece is we just hate vulnerability in being open with people, It's not.
Agreed.
It's a very open place to be. So, where are you excited about where the church is headed? So there's a lot of challenges. You know, we can cite all the stats of church decline and COVID sped up the church decline and all this stuff. But where's the areas where you say, I'm really excited about this in the future of the church, and I'm excited to see where this goes?
Yeah, you know, I think what you're talking about are institutional church statistics, which I believe are most likely different than um, scriptural scriptural definitions of the church. The church is the body of Christ. It's the spiritual community of people who love Him and who are honoring Him in their everyday life, who are engaged in sexual health. So I think institutions are going the way of institutions of this era. They're in decline and they'll continue to do so. So I agree with you on that. I think what I'm really excited about is the idea of getting very personal. There was a long season in my life where I was very passionate about doing the big church thing and expansion and all of that, and that was really enjoyable. But in this season, I'm really focused on the intimate, on the personal, and I think that's what gets me excited. I'm finding very passionate believers wherever I go. I'm working with many people in the recovery community who are experiencing life change. I'm real excited about that. You know, there's not much in me to work with institutions.
Yeah.
Not any gas left. And if there were gas to put in, it'd be too expensive. Sorry about
Good
that.
one. Oh, that's good.
Sorry.
We gotta have one gas joke right now. Pacha! Yeah, it's just I agree. I think it's hard to see in the church world today because there's all the turmoil and there's all the animosity that we fail to see what is going to be the long-term outcome of this. What is your reflections in the 60s? You know, you weren't that old in the 60s, but you kind of lived through that era as a child and got involved in church kind of coming out of that era. What are the similarities you see of, because after the 60s was the church growth movement. Really, all these mega churches that we have today began there. What do you see as similar in this era? There's differences, but what are some of those similarities you see?
Yeah, you know, historically, what happens before a great awakening of faith is an era of great darkness, and that was the case of the 60s. The entire decade was one of darkness. There was the threat of nuclear disaster, the assassination of JFK, race riots every summer. You know, in the 60s, the Christian college I went to would not permit African Americans to enroll because it had an all-white Southern board. They'd let Haitians enroll, African Haitians, but not African Americans.
Wow.
So the racism was high, hatred was high. Kent State, where National Guardsmen opened up on their own citizens. So it was a period of great, great upheaval. And in 1971, God had different plans. I think once culture hit the bottom, you know, in pain, in suffering, then it was excellent soil for God to start working. And I believe that the same will happen now. It also happened in the 50s. There was a great revival of faith in the 50s, early 50s, that came right after World War II. So I think our country and this world is ready for another great awakening. God is faithful. He's always been good. I believe it can happen. If you go back further in terms of great awakenings, there was the Protestant Revolution of the 16th century. That happened after seasons of the bubonic plague, you know, of great, great horror and pain. And I think our country is ready for another great awakening.
That's awesome.
I wonder what it'll be, though. You know, like you said, in the 70s, it was suddenly big churches.
Yeah.
I wonder if it's going to be that again, or if it's going to be very intimate communities like we're talking about. You know, kind of a going back to the family and caregivers with their kids, and I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, I think that, you know, as we close out, it's just when you're in the middle kind of like in Job's life, I think. When you're in the middle of it, it's really hard to see what's coming next.
I think it's impossible.
Yeah.
I think when you're in great pain like Job, he couldn't see the end. And also, most of Job, God is silent.
Yeah.
You know, 42,
No one likes to talk about that part.
42 chapters, God is quiet, and he is vocal at the beginning and the very end.
Yeah.
What's cool, my favorite verse in Job is 42 verse 5. It says, God and Job have this thing, they have a conversation, and Job says, you know, God, before I only heard about you, but now I can see you.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the purpose of grief and pain. It brings us to the end. All we need is God. And I think that day's coming for this country.
Yeah. I think so too. That's encouraging stuff, isn't it? It's just when you're in the silent part that's hard.
I know.
Oh, Glenn, we just
And
thank
when
you.
gas is so high.
I mean, that's in the silent
we
part.
cover that?
Yes, Glenn, I just want to thank you so much
you,
for letting us
Steven.
come out to the beautiful North Oregon coast with the mosquitoes and the beauty. And appreciated our interview with you and
Thank
appreciate
you,
your
Steven.
ministry and excited for the future of the church and appreciate
Yes,
all
sir.
you do.
I am too. The church is the body of Christ. I have great faith in that truth.
Yeah. Amen. Well, thanks, you guys. Thanks, Dr. Glenn.